if you clicked into this and you're watching this, chances are you might be asking yourself the question, should I buy into a franchise system? Do I maybe want to buy, do I want to pay for the startup costs of like a new franchise, new territory in the area that I'm in and try to get into this business? Or maybe even do I want to buy an established franchise, like a business where someone bought into a franchise maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, a couple years ago even, and they actually grew it a little bit and now it's established. It's a business that's actually running. Do I want to buy into this? If you're asking yourself that question, it's probably because you're wondering whether this could be a good opportunity, whether it makes sense. And hopefully in this video, we can help you unpack some of those questions, because this is something that we've looked into ourselves. There's a major acquisition that we're looking at right now where we would be buying into an established franchise. And it's something that we're weighing out and asking ourselves these questions. So we just want to use this as a little bit of a thought experiment just for someone who might be asking themselves these questions.
Now, I think one of the things that we've talked about in many past videos was the fact that franchises are a little more restricting. We were hammering the point home that a franchise locks you in, you're in a box, it's a lock box, you got no room to do anything. It's their way or the highway. And from what we've kind of learned as we've gotten, older, wiser, and had much more experience with talking to people who own franchises and people who are starting them, especially like our friend up there in Canada doing the detailing one, there's a lot more flexibility in some of these than the ones that we initially were led to believe. So they do have some marketing guidelines, obviously, because they are a brand. But one thing we're noticing is that they're allowing the franchisees in many systems to be a bit more creative with their stuff, because they know that they don't have all the answers. But as long as you're not doing anything to tank the brand, they're okay with it. And to that degree, I feel like that may be something that we walked back on recently when we looked at it and we're like, well, if they do give us the flexibility, there really isn't a reason.
So someone in the comments here, StarJun97 says no to franchise unless you're starting out or a bit more established and have some cash to build it. I'm curious, maybe you can tune in and give a little bit more detail to that comment, because I'm curious, because on the one hand you're saying unless you're starting out, but you're saying on the other hand, or you're more established. So I think there's different camps. Like,
I think he's speaking on the acquisition of, if you have a certain type of business, let's say a plumbing business, and then you buy a plumbing franchise, doesn't really make the most sense. You're not expanding your brand. You just have a second brand now. So I think that's what he's getting at. And I agree, unless you're starting out, it's a good way to jump into a new industry that maybe you wanted to get into, but you don't have the capital to necessarily do all on your own. Or if everything else in that industry is well overpriced, but you still do have the cash to buy something small, it might not be a bad idea to get the experience in a smaller franchise that still is profitable, because you will learn the business, you'll understand how it works, and you'll get some really good guidance most of the time with how to actually run the business. So I think a franchise provides a bit of a training wheel version of a business to people when they're starting out, like he was saying. So it's not for somebody necessarily expanding their core business, but if you're looking to start or get into something and you have the cash, I think it can give you a good taste of what the actual industry is like.
Now, here's what I would say is just an opinion thing, is because I've looked at a lot of different ones, particularly in the home services field, that we really like, because we see a lot of opportunity and a lot of recession resistance and just stuff that isn't going to be interrupted as much by AI, at least the labor portion of it. The rest of it, the admin part of it, is absolutely being interrupted by AI. But what we've looked into a lot and seen is, if you're getting into something where you have to start that franchise territory, that is a massively lower value proposition than if you're able to maybe acquire something that was a new franchise opportunity or territory maybe 3, 5, 10 years ago, and someone actually took the time and grew it and built out a business around it. I think it's just a much different value proposition, because at the end of the day, they have a lower failure rate. They just have they have support. So that's one of the big pieces of the value proposition. But for many of the ones that you're starting fresh with a territory, a huge thing that I think detracts from it being a big value proposition for you is that it takes a really long time for it to start making real money and paying you. So you might have to keep working your job, but also you've got this or doing another business, but also you've got this thing that's taking your time and that you have to put a lot of time into to try to get it off the ground.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that because I think it was like 99% correct. The 1% is going to be those franchises that you see that have very high rates of return for their franchisees. Not all of them do, obviously, but I'm going to use the gold standard and the not so gold standard. The gold standard is Chick-fil-A. Everybody knows they are very deliberate. It is a almost 2-year long process. I think somebody told me once it's a long time. They require the least amount of capital up front. You still do have to have a certain net worth, but they require you to be engaged and involved in the business every single week. So it is one of those businesses that they are pretty involved in themselves as a corporate thing. And they specifically will only place them in areas where they have enough research to state, you will not fail here if you follow our rules. So I think that's a way that they really do help their franchisees. And certain ones will be very much like that. Well, they'll be like, if you do this in this area, yes, we can give you a franchise. That's why they'll allow them to be there. The other side of that coin is Subway. And Subway committed the cardinal sin of doing zero research and just putting them everywhere. I mean, there was a time, I think, when we were growing up where you could throw a rock and hit 2 Subways because they'd be next to each other. I think there's some memes where literally there's a picture of somebody taking a picture of like a Subway and then looking over to the next block and taking a picture of the Subway in the second block. And that's because they weren't really making a high barrier to entry for their franchisees. And frankly, they're like, it's sandwiches. Everybody will always want sandwiches. Not when they're 2 feet apart and you're just going to whichever one's closest. So you need to do your due diligence on the franchisor as a whole and like how big they are, what their track rate is. You can actually find these numbers quite easily, actually, franchisee success rates with different groups. So dive into that for sure.
And that's very much on the side of like, if you're getting into one that's a new territory, I think and we're talking about 2 different things here, but I think the great thing about if you're trying to acquire a franchise that's like already been around is it's going to have historical numbers and financials on what it's actually been doing. So that can help you make a much more informed decision about like, is this going to help me meet my goals? But I think at the end of the day, it's like, it comes down to what are your goals? If you very much like the startup grind and you've got some capital that you want to put into this thing and you're going to have other sources of income and you want to just put work into it and let it slowly develop and start paying you, and maybe a couple of years start paying you real money, and you really want to develop that brand, then I think that's kind of what you're facing in most of these. But for one that's a little bit more established already, that cash flow might already be there to a degree. Now, it might not have the same level of cash flow when you step into it, or if you're a really great operator and you really bring your heart and soul into it and you're doing well and following the script, then it might actually do better. But it's already kind of built and some of the hurdles are out of the way. But I think it really just comes down to what are your goals. And of course, starting one from scratch is a lot more financially accessible too.
I think something I'd like to see though is I think this could be an interesting concept for a video. Getting a franchise and then bringing somebody who has either built or successfully exited a company in the same industry, dropping them into a franchise and seeing how they perform and how they operate in there. Because I feel like it could be a good test to see, is the franchise good because of the systems, or is it the operator that makes the franchise? So I would, how idiot proof is a franchise model if we put an expert into there and then, or switch it out with somebody who's never run a business and see how they operate. So obviously not, with a franchise that we would know personally, but we might be able to figure that out somewhere else. But I think that'd be a fun TV show idea, actually.
I think it's a fascinating question because I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think it's very much like it very much requires a good operator for any business, franchises included, to have any success. Like it really requires good operating. That's why the failure rate for businesses is so high for small businesses. But I think on the other hand, a good franchise that actually has legitimately good support and is structured well and gives you the right kind of leeway to make the right kind of decisions, I think, it decreases that failure rate because they have figured out more of the things that work and they just push you to do what works. So it's all part of the conversation. But I think for someone who for someone who is maybe like a serial entrepreneur and wants to skip some of the, like, maybe you've been through the startup phase a few times before, like I have, like I know many people have, like, and you've kind of gone through that grind and that slosh multiple times and tried to get through it and been through it successfully. It's just a little exhausting sometimes to start a brand completely from scratch and really try to develop it from the ground up when you kind of know what works at a higher level. And so I think it offers a chance to skip some of those steps in many cases. It's got a proven business model where it, rather than kind of like working in the business and serving certain roles for years until you can build yourself out and slowly accrue the capital, you could just bring all the capital in the first place, the working capital that you need to float things a few months, and put all the right people in the right positions that have already worked in other structures, and you might have a better chance of it working. So I think it's a good value proposition for someone who knows what they're doing in business a little bit. For someone that's just starting out, I actually think I would dissuade them from just jumping right into a franchise, because you haven't really paid, and I don't want to sound like that guy, but you haven't paid like the entrepreneur tax yet of learning what it takes to actually go through the grind and make something work. And if you're getting into it because you just think it's going to be the easy route and it's like it's business on easy mode, that's definitely not the case. They give the support and the structure, but the hard part of any business is the execution and like consistently showing up every day and doing what's needed to be done to make the business successful. And that's the part that if you haven't built that muscle of doing what it takes, then getting into a brand new franchise territory where you have to maybe take a big loan out or put a lot of your wealth on the table to get it started, you might not be so happy with how long it takes to see some of that back.
No, I think it's a little bit different on my perspective. I think that franchise systems are designed mostly for people who have never worked in an industry, thus the amount of training and all sorts of SOPs that you have to go through during usually they have like these mini retreats where they teach you how to do it. So I think if you have the work ethic and the kind of entrepreneurial spirit, a franchise could be a very good option. It's a little more restrictive than starting your own thing, sure, but if you've got that entrepreneurial spirit, it's a good company. It doesn't, try to take everything from its franchisees, and it's very fair, and it, supports you. I think if you got the grind set, I guess it would be called, or the kind of that kind of like hustle culture in you, you could get through those first couple years of having it be pretty rough and pretty difficult and get to the other side where you're actually making better money than you were and actually finding that this is a lot more enjoyable than you were. So I think it really depends on the person. I wouldn't say cross yourself out because you've never done the job. You just have to be ready to work.
That's exactly right. Now, if this conversation has been interesting to you and it got you thinking a little bit, we have conversations like this every single Tuesday night, right around 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So tune in, follow the channel, subscribe wherever you're at, and Ryan and I will see you next time. Just let us know what you want us to cover. Hop in the comments. Let us know what questions you have, comments you have, and things that you want us to talk about on the show, because we're always covering different business topics, whether it's about things that are maybe startup focused, like a franchise, or even more established businesses and acquisitions. Those are the types of things that we love to unpack on the show. So we'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for tuning in.